we're signing off and welcoming
Leigh Newman. Oh my gosh. Who can I thank? I really do. This is my first time at Swanee. I'm a newbie. That's an Alaskan word. And I would like to thank all the usual suspects like Leah and Adam and Gwen and all the staff and anybody who'd made me that little gin and tonic when they put the Saint Germain green stuff in there. And every playwright that I sat with during dinner, because I like to eat at 6:29 exactly. All the Pavlovian people that showed up, so grateful for this beautiful food and a place to sleep. I know we're not supposed to come here for spiritual repair, but I definitely showed up a husk of myself, and I'm leaving filled with friends and beautiful words and an understanding of why we do what we do, which I think I might have lost this year had not I come here. So thank you all. I wrote a book called Nobody Gets Out Alive. This is the only conference in my life that people have not come up to me and said, oh, you're that girl that hunts and fishes and raised her own food and built her own cabin growing up and flew her own airplanes. I know I don't really look like that. But I'm going to read a story about town life, which is a lot of the reason why I wrote the book, because I felt like people hadn't really talked about what town life was like in Alaska, which is not dissimilar to the rest of the United States. The only thing you need to know in terms of vocabulary is when I talk about a blue bear, there's a blue bear that goes throughout the book. Blue bears are bears that eat a kind of lichen, and they turn a grayish blue. And this one is a dead blue bear that got shot by a hunter and is displayed in different living rooms around this lake in Alaska where many of these people live, called Diamond Lake. And it is a floatplane lake. That's another confusion, is that many times when I referred to a cub or a beaver, that's a plane, not an animal, which shows you some of the confusion of this culture. This is called Valley of the Moon. My sister is in town and wants to meet. I picked Suite 100 for its wide selection of French varietals and its convenient location on the B55 People Mover. Suite 100 is located in a boxy, low-rise complex next to a vision clinic and a podiatrist practice. The windows are tinted, and the entrance is a hallway lined with rent-a-plants and a framed listing of professional tenants. I click past all this, pleased as always by the official sound of my heels on the tile, and pull open the door. Other than the missing treasure chest and the receptionist's desk, the decor of the wine bar still looks like the dentist office it formerly was. A muted assortment of chairs and tables, inoffensive lighting. A few men wait at the bar, peering into voluminous glasses of Cabernet, as though an ancient highlights crossword might surface from its depths. On a hook by the hostess hangs a key attached to an awkward hunk of driftwood, presumably meant to keep you from misplacing it on the journey to the bathroom. It's also on a purple lanyard. The hostess is missing, and the tables are mostly empty, save for a few women with tasteful sunsets of eyeshadow over each eye. They sit by the fireplace, bronzed in the clingy light. At least one is familiar to me. High school, cotillion, Girl Scouts, Katie, Kirsten, Carlene. There is something familiar about her spray-on tan, her charm bracelet, her hesitant way of crossing her legs. The most reassuring part of dropping out of the Anchorage elite is that you no longer have to remember who is who or the last time you forgot it. You can just smile and nod slightly as if you are on your way to pick up your free bouquet of flowers on the other side of the room. This is my method, and tonight is easier than most. I am swaddled head to heels in creamy beige cashmere stolen from my stepmother's latest Neiman Marcus mail order shipment. Jamie waves me over. She's taken an expansive leather boot for 6 or more, all for herself. She does this everywhere we meet, but this time she has a reason. She's pregnant, indisputably so, overflowing onto the table. Don't get up, I say, and slide in next to her. She smells of cocoa butter and the faintest whiff of morning sickness. I can't help it. I reach for her stomach. It is so warm, so firm. As if on command, a dense lump of baby heaves up from under her skin, the size and shape of a tiny head. I follow it with my hand and meet my sister's hand, and when all three of us are stacked up like this, me, Jamie, baby, the whole world seems to go quiet, beautiful, glazed with the kind of understanding we used to have, back when we could look at each other and know without a word or a peek into each other's cupped fingers that we had both chosen identical butterscotch candies from the bowl on the bank lady's desk. You are amazing, I say. You are going to be a mom. I'm already a mom, says Jamie, which is true, but slightly painful. Her three-year-old daughter Jude lives with her and her wife Flora in Portland, Oregon. I have never met them or seen their blue bungalow covered in wild sea roses. Jamie refuses to bring her family up to Anchorage, and I can't leave Mom by herself for more than a few hours. We let go hands, and Jamie begins to cry. Her tears are loose, silent, runny. They go on for a while. She doesn't even rub them off with her napkin. According to my memory, which is not always the most reliable, Jamie doesn't cry in front of other people. She also doesn't eat pineapple, sleep on her stomach, or talk to Mom except in the presence of Dad, and even then she won't look at Mom. I can come back, said the waitress. She is older than us, with a faint white scar down her cheek that I like to think is from a tabby cat who did not mean to scratch her, but that is so clean, so precise on its edges, it implies only a knife. My sister and I had a babysitter with a similar scar on her face. Her name was Fern. When I think of Fern, I think of Mom. When I think of Mom, I worry that she's going to try to do something ambitious, like trying to make popcorn on the stove instead of the microwave. We have an agreement about this, but it's not as if I'm exactly stringent about the rules. A bottle of Stag's Leap, 1997, says my sister, still crying. Cask 23. The waitress glances at her baby bump. We have tests in the restroom, free of charge, she says. This is the most recent idea of a local city councilman who retrofitted the tampon machines in local bars to dispense 2-minute pregnancy sticks. A record-setting number of babies are born in our state with fetal alcohol syndrome. Drunk women are supposed to go into the stall, pee, and if a plus sign pops up, stop drinking. There are potent mysteries in this logic, such as what women do when panicked. I am not the genius in our family. Dad and Jamie vie for that, but I do have a terrible feeling that if you were to graph the number of Jaeger shots against the number of positive pee sticks on the bathroom floor, you might end up with a data set of rapidly escalating birth defects. The wine is for her, my sister says, pointing at me. I'm not drinking. I look at her again, confused. My sister never lets me drink, and besides, my license has a do not serve line through it, one of the unavoidable downsides of a wet and reckless. Anything else, the waitress says to my sister. Just the bottle. She blows her nose. And why the fuck not? A dozen oysters. A few things for the record that might explain how the night unfolds. This first one took place long ago, when our mother did not drink except at parties, and left home regularly for groceries and trips to stores and offices and other grown-up places. Even then, however, she pulled Jamie and me from school for snuggle days, during which we never changed out of nightgowns and read picture books in bed, The Velveteen Rabbit mostly, or Sylvester and the Magic Pebble. Mom was a loving, wonderful parent even when she started disappearing in the afternoons. She hired a girl named Fern to babysit us. Fern was 19 and soft in a plump, bewildered way, as if she expected you to throw a can of soda at her. She had a scar on her face plus braces and limp, feathery hair that smelled of hot oil treatments, a ritual she completed each week with a magical little vial that she warmed up in the microwave. That summer, Fern also had a boyfriend named Buck, who worked at the strip mall carnival at the back lot of Fred Meyer's. The strip mall carnival had been on our radar for most of our lives. Out it sprang each July, suddenly there on the asphalt like a little toothpick city against the mass of the mountains, each teetering, aging ride pierced with tatters of falling scream. Of course, we were dying to go, dying. Fern wouldn't let us. We fought her and crushed her and hopped in the back of Buck's eagle-hooded car for an afternoon of all free rides and games, the last of which was when Buck tried to take me into the porta potty and show me how to wipe his dick. I was 7. Jamie was 13. Jamie banged on the door yelling she was going to puke on his boots, she was going to call the troopers. When he opened up, she grabbed my hand and we ran with me to the popcorn cart where we hid until we heard Fern calling for us. "Guys," she said in her helpless voice, "come on, you guys. I'm going to tell your mom on you." She didn't tell. We didn't either. Instead, Jamie made Fern make us sloppy joes every night for dinner and give us home perms in the guest bathroom. By the end of the summer, Buck was arrested for aggravated assault and rape. His victim was a 65-year-old native lady walking home from a picnic. 6 months later, when Fern tried to steal Mom's Mickey Moto pearls to pay for Buck's bail and bungled the effort, Mom fired her, then arranged a job for her as a receptionist at Dad's office, then paid for computer classes so Dad wouldn't fire her either. Imagine, Mom told us, being so alone in this world. She smiled as if a sad, old-fashioned song had just come on the radio and only she could hear it. At the time, Dad may have applauded her efforts. No one in our family was ever denied the opportunity to self-improve. Like most people in Alaska, we had come from dirt and sorry circumstances, as he described it. Even our house was constantly being gutted and redone with all new carpet or crown molding. He still lives there with our stepmother, even though I can hardly recognize it under the stonework and marbles and acres of fastidiously painted white decking that in the winter, when Diamond Lake freezes, makes it look like a cruise ship doing a deep final dive into the Arctic Sea. A shiny flotsams of airplanes and speedboats and snow machine washes up by Dad's dock, depending on the season. The old family beaver changes from skis to floats and back to skis. It is an enormous plane, painted the same electric green as the tractor Dad drove as a boy, growing up on a dirt floor farm in Minnesota. He brought it to fly Jamie and me out to the wilderness to fish and hunt, and not turned into spoiled lake kids. To reinforce the message, he drew up a homemade contract we both had to sign. I will go to college, learn to fly, shoot a caribou, and vote in every election. Signed, Jamie, age 11, Becca, age 6. The order in which we were to accomplish all this was at our discretion. Dad is an orthopedic surgeon, but only when he's not starting corporations and shell companies in the Caribbean. He brought the first MRI to Anchorage and developed what many in the town called a medical monopoly, which includes various surgery robots and DNA centrifuges and then other than visionary diagnostic devices. He housed them in a for-profit clinic where the majority of patients proceeded to pay their bills using an in-state subsidiary of a larger out-of-state HMO on whose board he silently serves. Some of this success was accomplished while he was sober, but not much. Or so I've heard. I am too young to remember the details of the parties that neighbors and various strangers bring up, still dumbfounded and nostalgic, about the night in the backyard when Danny Bob sculpted a king salmon out of ice using an electric turkey carving knife, the time he drew a drill bit for an ACL reconstruction on a cocktail napkin that would go on to be patented and render all other models obsolete, the time he shot his compound bow off the roof of the house and hit a watermelon in a canoe floating in the middle of Diamond Lake. Then there was the Glacier Bear, about which these people always say, "Did Danny Bob ever get that blue bear back?" Mom has the bear, as of a week ago, when Dad showed up at the door and gave it to her. She was so happy to see him and made such a huge sloppy fuss about my putting it in the living room by the window. She asked him to stay for dinner, which at our house means takeout Siam cuisine, a handful of calliope, and a vodka blueberry smoothie. He was very kind about declining and very kind about the rotting piles of newspapers, which Mom stacks up and uses to cut out paper snowflakes. They are very worried-looking snowflakes, and there are a lot of them. Dad picked one up and looked at me through the intricate, shaky slits, then said in a tender voice, which took me by surprise, "It wasn't all shit and shenanigans, sweetheart. At the end of the day, we managed to end up with you." I stood there, letting all the little quiet bubbles of happiness fizz through me, but also wishing in a secret, terrible way that Jamie had been here to hear him say this. I am still not sure how memory works. Sometimes I can remember the silky rush of Mom's dress as she walked by, and the bright electric bits that sparkled off her between the pantyhose and the fabric. I can remember looking at Jamie to see if she had seen these magical fireworks and confirming by the bright brown gasp in her eyes that she had. I can remember sitting on Dad's lap as he flew us in the Beaver and his pointing to the sky ahead and telling me to pick a cloud, any cloud, in my believing at this time that they were his to give. Nobody can understand the particulars of another person's loneliness, but it still seems so confusing that it was Dad's best friend that Mom fell for. Jamie says this happened this summer with Buck and the carnival, which explains why Mom was never around. She was across the lake at Will Bartlett's, getting her rocks off, as Jamie describes it. According to Jamie, and Jamie is the only person who will tell me about what happened, everything came out at Dad's annual Christmas in July party. I do not remember everyone leaving or Dad banging Mom's head over and over against the edge of the mahogany credenza, or Mom dragging herself and me and Jamie through the kitchen and down into the crawl space to hide. I do remember the smell, though. Most of the newish houses on Diamond Lake are built on stilts in case of flooding. Once you have spent a few hours squatting in the dank, cakey, salmon-smelling clay, your mother's hand over your mouth to keep you quiet, you can't walk across a living room, even one lined in glossy white Italian stone, without feeling at least somewhat disconcerted about what lurks underneath. A few days later, Mom loaded up Dad's cream-colored Coupe de Ville and drove us down the unpaved Alcan to British Columbia. 2,200 miles of potholes and radio static and great lush Canadian trees rushed by as Jamie and I lay in the back seat, bickering and a little afraid. Mom refused to wear sunglasses and walked into whatever little roadside store we happened upon with her bashed-in eyes like two burnt-out light bulbs in the center of her face. Mom is a delicate, overly patient woman who speaks as if she is reading a good-night book while asking you to take out the garbage, or go see if a man is hiding in the bushes at the end of the driveway, her voice rising up at the end of every sentence the way kindergarten teachers do when they're about to turn the page. Not once has she ever yelled at us, but there was a flinty, fearsome resolve displayed during those long 2 weeks that I have never forgotten and never seen since. She had a plan, and the plan was not what we expected from a woman who had never been outside of Alaska except for a honeymoon to Hawaii and the tiny factory town in Ohio where she had been raised. The plan, she told us at the steering wheel, was Montreal. They spoke French there, she said. She had always wanted to learn French. It was the language of diplomacy and art and culture. Jamie, to my surprise, was all for it. She wanted to see a ballet, a real one with toe shoes, like in the movies. We spent 6 hours in the suburbs of Montreal before Mom turned the Coupe de Ville around and drove us straight back to Alaska. My sister was the one who walked into our house and found it stripped empty save for Dad's Blue Bear. Everything we owned was gone, and so were most of the walls and appliances. Upstairs, she found our soon-to-be stepmother, Fern, with some tile and wallpaper catalogs. I was asleep in the car, but I can picture it from what Jamie later described in lavish detail. Fern's disco shorts, her bangle bracelets, her plastic slip-on heels. She had dropped the weight and gotten highlights and now spoke in an airy tone, addressing everyone as Bunny. For example, "You poor Bunny, sit down and let me get you a glass of Evian." Meanwhile, our mother was having a nervous breakdown in the driveway from which she was never to recover. I say all of this only because this is where my memory fizzles out, and I feel terrible for Jamie. I need to recognize some of the hardships she endured. It was Jamie who drove Mom to the hospital and forced Dad to buy the crappy rancher next door for the three of us to live in after Mom was released. It was Jamie who made Dad sign a homemade contract that somehow held up in court, stipulating that he pay for a working vehicle for Mom, plus heat and electric, as well as any living expenses Mom might incur, as long as she provided itemized receipts. Jamie was 15 by then. Nobody knew it but me, but she still had the ballet tickets. She hid them in her jewelry box, under the lining in the back of the top compartment, Le Grand Ballet, Orchestra, L33, M33, S36. Even now, I wonder which of us would have had to sit alone. As soon as the oysters arrive, Jamie wipes her face, leans over, and tells me that my snuggled days with Mom are over. I don't know what she's talking about exactly, but the oysters look like what oysters always look like, hunks of dead lung on a shell. I look at the water glass, the little bubble of fabric where the tablecloth has bunched up. The wine is not here. Where's the wine? Jamie gives me a patronizing smile. Miss, she says to the waitress, my sister needs her bottle right now. Off the waitress whisks, as people so often do around Jamie, suddenly electrified with the desire to serve. Have an oyster, my sister says. They're a delicacy. I need to check on Mom, I say, but I don't leave. Look, she says, you're in trouble. Don't you understand that yet? The idea has occurred to me. I am not the best with email or voicemail or mail or meter readers or people that come to the door and ring the bell. I've been telling you this day would come, said Jamie. Dad and Fern are overextended. He's aging and made some risky moves that didn't pan out. She's spending the way she always has and won't listen. Last year, I offered to take over Mom's mortgage plus both your expenses, but the more I thought about it, her voice slows, silkens. I just feel the situation isn't healthy. Not for you or Mom. She stops. She looks down at an oyster but doesn't eat it. She loves oysters. For a minute, I think she's trying to prove to me how disciplined she is, unlike my slovenly, wet and reckless self, that I remember that pregnant people can't eat shellfish. And so, she says, I came to a decision. I will continue to pay for the house. I will get Mom a professional caretaker, under the condition that you move out and get a job. I eat an oyster. I eat another one. They taste like what oysters taste like, chilled death. I eat another. I wonder what Mom would do, but I know what she would do. Make a vodka blueberry smoothie and forget to put the top on the blender and tell me I'm her magical baby girl for cleaning the splatter off the ceiling. Taking care of Mom, as much as I love her, is a lot of work. Down in Portland, Jamie's life is one long farmer's market, with her and Flora and Jude running around and matching sneakers and licking popsicles. They throw sticks for their golden retriever. They grow kale in their backyard. I see it all on Instagram, where Flora posts the pictures. What this makes me hope is that one day all this happiness will make Jamie happy. Last year, she started proceedings to put Mom in some kind of facility. I didn't know that a social worker could deem you unfit for wanting to stay in your home, cut snowflakes, and drink vodka blueberry smoothies. But it turns out if you're an agoraphobic alcoholic with a caretaker, such as myself, who occasionally takes your anti-anxiety meds and drives into a Papa John's pizzeria one night, the state can mandate certain at-home visits. It has been 6 months since Mom and I finally got rid of Miss Caroline and her pre-printed self-care checklists. I look down at my hands. They are shaking. Where's Flora? I say. Why didn't Flora come? She's busy, says Jamie. She's transitioning Jude into a toddler bed. I swallow the last of my oyster. The wine comes. Due to the vintage, it has to breathe in a carafe for 20 minutes, during which I watch the dense, velvety liquid behind the swoop of glass, along with the reflection of my stunned, stupefied face. I thought you and Dad don't talk anymore, I finally say. We don't. We negotiate. I know how to negotiate, I say. Great. I'm open. We're at the table. What do you want? This takes me a minute. I want so many things. A dog? I say. Go get one, says Jamie. You're not really the fuck-up in this situation. You'll see, once we get you away from Mom and her more helpless-than-thou power trip. On she goes. Mom is the problem. Mom let the world run over her and drag me under with her. When was the last time I showered the shit off her when she messed herself? Last night? Tonight? Though this last situation happens more regularly than I prefer, it's not as if Mom does it on purpose. She always cries. She always tells me to go ahead and just leave her like Jamie did. The only thing I know how to do when my sister is talking like this is to go into a little home movie I have in my mind of her cutting oranges on a beach. So much of my memories are gone, but not this one. Jamie has a little knife. Dad is down river fishing. Mom is lying on a blanket reading a book. Jamie takes the slice of orange and peels off all the white, stringy yuck and feeds it to me with the tips of her fingers. You be the baby eagle, she says, and I'll be the eagle. Even then I thought, I want to be the eagle. But at the time, I thought the game was only going to last for the afternoon. Besides, she wanted to be the eagle so badly. The cab, of course, is not ready. I sit up all the same and pour myself a glass, that first sip glittering through me like melted ruby slippers. I take it with me when I leave the table. Jamie is still talking. I may be passive, as she says, and self-harming, as she says, and willfully loving to those who cannot love, as she says. But I am not beyond self-defense. Over at the bar, the men perk up, aware all too quickly that a woman under 40 is headed their way, clutching booze. They are useless to me, unrelated to Jamie and what might upset her. I swerve over to the sunsets. As I suspected, I really do know them. Becca, says the one I noticed when I entered. She smells like every scented candle in the world, the whole delicious gambit, Zanzibar to toasted almond. I meant to come over earlier. I gesture vaguely, as if sweeping aside the pesky crumbs of time. We clink glasses. A name sizzles through me, as sometimes happens. Kirsten, Kristen. I mumble out some version of the two. And her friends, Stacy, Michelle, and Dina, which, like Mark, John, and Dave, are really all the same name. All four are plastered on wine by the glass, a purchasing habit that incenses Jamie, not just because it costs double, but because women have to stop lying to themselves about their desire to get drunk and just order a bottle. So you're still in town, says Kristen. Only when I'm tipsy, I say. She laughs. I laugh. I heard about the incident, she says in a kind voice. Is there anything I can do? It is true that my arrest, but not the settlement with Papa John's, made the paper. But something else lumps in the back of my mind, a crude and reptilian understanding that makes more sense as soon as Kristen looks over at Jamie. Jamie looks down at the oysters. Because, of course, as I must have known without really knowing, they were sweethearts back when. Hanging out upstairs in her white canopy bed in Dad's all-white house, supposedly studying for the mathtastics match. Kristen raises her glass. Jamie nods and saunters over, as only Jamie can do while 8 months pregnant. Are you hitting on my sister, she says, cool as a mountain stream. Thank you.
You know how I get over, you know how I get over being nervous at a reading? I don't. All right. That's it. That's the joke. That's the joke. Good evening, beloveds. Hello, everybody. How are you doing tonight? We made it, right? We made it. Look, I'm so thankful to be here. I'm so thankful to all the usual suspects, especially the people that were in my class, but also my co-teacher, Vanessa, who had to go back to her family, who's so lovely. To Adam and Gwen, and who's the other lady? Oh, Leah, that's right, Leah as well, of course. All right, so Leigh, thank you for that. That was excellent. So I'm not gonna read my whole time, so I'm gonna set this up a little bit for reasons I'll explain in a second. I've been talking for the past, 2 weeks here about community and about hidden histories, the things that are right underneath our noses that we don't notice, that can form the foundations of the work you want to create in the world, because the whole purpose of this conference is so you can leave here and create work in the world. So I want to give you an example that I didn't expect to find, because I was here last year, I didn't see it, and I've been here this year, I didn't see it till like 3 days ago. When you walk out of the auditorium and you get to those double doors that lead out onto the street, before you exit the building, there's a plaque on the wall right there. And the plaque has the names of two people. It says Joseph Merrick Jones, born in 1903, died March 11, 1963, and Eugenie Pennick Jones, born in 1902, died the same day, March 11th, 1963. My man Michael Knight called the reason why they died on the same day. But what I didn't know was this. So I'm a black Southerner. I love my South. I mean, I know people like give it a bad rap and all that. But even I have this sort of like black cloud over my head when I see things in certain contexts. I sort of go towards the negative side of things. So I go, all right, here's a plaque in an old Southern university. You know, it also said that he was the great-grandson of Leonidas Polk. So I'm like, probably Confederates and, you know, yada, yada, yada. So I had the worst possible ideas what was happening right there. Then I looked it up. This couple, this man, Joseph and Eugenie, they're actually from New Orleans, where I'm from, my hometown. And on top of that, they were kind of a power couple. Joseph was somebody who worked at Tulane University, which is like right next to my house almost. And he was actually on the board of governors for Tulane in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. He was beloved by people in that area. And in 1963, he made an announcement that he was going to allow black folks into the university for the first time. And then 3 days later, their house burned down mysteriously with both of them in it. That's one simple example of things that are right in front of your face. I've walked through that door as many times as you have, maybe 5 times as many times, right? So on that cheery note, let's move into the reading, right? All right, so I am blessed to have a book coming out on March 5th. It's called The American Daughters, okay? It's my third book, and it exists in part because of people in this room, and also my Randolph family who's here as well, and other people. And like I said, I'm not going to read the entire time. The book, in my mind, is dedicated to all my women ancestors. On the cover, which I can't show it because it's not been released yet, it says "For Our Mothers" on the cover. That's also the epigraph, or one of the dedication, excuse me. And the book is designed to be a little bit fragmented, fractured, experimental, and polyphonic. So I'm saying this because you're not reading the actual text, so I'm going to set this up real clean so you know what I'm doing while I'm doing it up here. All right, first order of business. I'm going to give you the marketing copy that Random House made for the book. All right, The American Daughters, a gripping historical novel about a spirited girl who joins a sisterhood working to undermine the Confederates, from the award-winning author of We Cast a Shadow, this guy right here. All right, okay. And then a little bit of the sort of plot. Again, this is to help you navigate what I'm going to do when I read this. All right, main character. Adi is a curious, sharp-witted girl, and her fierce mother, Sanit, are an inseparable duo in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Enslaved to a businessman in the French Quarter of New Orleans, the pair spend their days dreaming of a loving future and reminiscing on their family's rebellious and storied history. When mother and daughter are separated, Adi is left hopeless and directionless until she stumbles upon the Mockingbird Inn and meets Lenore, a free black woman with whom she becomes fast friends. Lenore invites Adi to join a clandestine society of spies called the Daughters. With the courage instilled in her by her mother, Sanit, and help from these strong women, Adi learns to choose herself. So begins her journey toward liberation and imagining a new future. The American Daughters is a novel of hope and triumph that reminds us what is possible when a community bands together to fight for their freedom. Okay, now, some people hate epigraphs. I love epigraphs. So I got 3 of them, and like I said, I'm not reading the entire thing, so this is part of the setup. All right. Epigraph number 1. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. Gwendolyn Brooks. 2. Love is contraband in hell, because love is an acid that eats away at bars. And 3. Once you really know yourself, can't nobody tell you nothing about you. Megan Thee Stallion. All right, and the last part of the setup is that the book, again, I said it's polyphonic. There's like inserts, there's like maps. I mean, there's like other voices coming into the text. But also has a very, very short prologue, which is only 1 page. I'm going to read that page. And just so you know, the prologue is basically 2 transcripts from the future looking back on the past. This is Researchers File 2169 translated fragment of historical document known as Adi, or the Confession of a Freedwoman. In grasping my pen and putting my hand to page, I felt as though I existed for the first time. I was the property of no one save myself. Therefore, I could freely give myself to those I loved. No? As my mother promised. I had once and for all found a place for myself in the world, a place of complete freedom, the freedom of birds, flower petals, and the stars above. Researchers file 2152. Conversation transcript. Read the American Daughters. This is Jackson Milia Signalman, born 1975, died 2019. Interview from March 26, 2017 at Petrie House in Connecticut. See, people kept asking me if Adi's was a true story. I never lied now. Now, I admitted that I did work to fill in the gaps and complete that narrative. But by this time, the book had been reprinted twice. I played down my involvement because I never wanted the hoopla to be about me. It was her story. You feel me? That couldn't last. I see that now. Try as I might to stay out of the way, I was involved in ways I didn't even understand. See, they were trying to tell me the story about Adi was from back in the day, some fiction. But I knew Adi was real. Have you read Confession? Yeah, I'm talking about Adi's diary. No? That's your loss. If you ever do read it, you'll see that she practically glows from the page. Next thing I know, someone show up talking about they got some hair and they want to test my hair. So I let them do it. And it was a match. Now, ain't that something? That changed everything. Everything. All right, this is the main part of the chapter. Give me a second. Of all the tiresome habits of men, what drove Adi, known here as Antoinette Marianne Dumarche, to her wits' end, was men's impulse to expand the pettiest of their life's moments to epic proportions. Such men exalted minor disagreements to the level of legend, delivering a coup de grace to the jaw of some Yankee 3 times their size. Of course, none of these meager men had a good trade. They were all captains of industry, each of them, but the barons of Holland and New York would soon eclipse their fortunes. Such men never encountered a bird pecking for sustenance. No, the creature was always a wolf at the door, its teeth eager to rip the tendons from a man's throat. Of course, this was the basement into which Adi's life had fallen. In the high-ceilinged dining room of her self-proclaimed father, John Dumarche's Vieux Carré townhouse, she imagined how recollections of the night might be transformed into retelling, if any of them survived. It was early still, but the men were already several sheets to the wind. A spittoon lay on its side rolling. There was a scattering of empty brown bottles, and a filthy apron was draped on the kitchen doorknob. Hers, or Lenore's, or another's. Adi wasn't sure. In this pulsing night, the men were occupied, sharing drunken jokes about their exploits and their half-despised cronies, and so, of course, the bodies of the women present could become the only source material of the massacre of March 1862. All the better to distract them. The banner procured by Lenore hung beneath the crowned molding and proclaimed quadroon ball. Adi stood below the cursed thing, wrestling in the mud of these men's desires. Adi's dark, thin shoulders shone glorious like blackberries in moonlight. Above the peach fabric of her dress, quadroon ball, evoked visions of grandeur, of wealthy, powerful, refined men engaging in light scandal, out of the view of their pale, dismissive wives, back on the slave labor camps, also called plantations. But this was no ballroom. Though it might countenance a schottische or a Viennese waltz, she imagined that these facts wouldn't matter, that there'd be a false version of her, Adi, in the retelling. By this reliance on mythology and nostalgia, she imagined the men desired to burnish their self-regard. After they won the war, this night was meant to become a part of their origin story, proof of their mastery over the world. But now these men, round-bellied, wall-eyed, and gasping, were too distraught for the fiction to hold true for even a second. The redness of Dumarche's face stood out even at 20 paces. He wanted something, wine or bread or cheese or her. She removed the wooden box from the sleeve of fabric at her waist. She ran her finger along the engraved ivory top, a cameo of Napoleon at battle. She opened it, pinched snuff into the flame between her thumb and forefinger, and inhaled the material into her nose. She watched on as Dumarche contorted his face at her. She, to most observers, was not down amongst the dregs of society. She was comely and tall, with her thick hair wrapped in a tignon in the style of her mother. In public, she wore fine silk over crinoline, and that night with the boy men, finer silk still, for it was required of her. Her governess, God rest her, Mrs. Orson, had taught her penmanship and the appropriate placement of weighty silver utensils, the most grand, eloquent French, the deepest curtsy. Adi had played Chopin, blindfolded, in that very parlor. New Orleans was at that time at war with itself, as always. It was the core of the South, wealthiest, worldliest, and most in love with its own beauty. A wealth and beauty carried, of course, upon the haunches of people like Adi. Dumarche glared at her. She withheld the disgust she felt from reaching her face and looked at the grandfather clock, thinking one more tick-tock of the clock on the last night of her life. Soon, she would join her mother. 10 years earlier, she had been riding in the back of a long cart, lying against her mother's breast. There were other people, too, whom she had never fully forgotten. A boy with large eyes who played with his toes and poked his tongue out at her. It had been a long trip, days from a place called Constantia that she wouldn't ever fully remember. The woman next to her mother, with skin like riverbank clay, craned her head to look past others. Her neck had scars like vines. Won't be long now, Adi's mother, Sanit, said. Woman, how you know, a man said. Not like you from here. The woman and children were tied to each other, but the man's hands were tied together so tight that the flesh on the downside of his palms was purple. Ain't no stream as wide as that, she said. I've been here before. The last time someone saw me downriver, before I escaped. You ran away? The man asked, his eyes wide. Can't nobody hold me. Can't nobody hold me unless I let him, Sanit said. He went from disbelief to smiling. One of the white men on the seat at the front of the cart cracked his whip over their heads. You jigs better shut up, he said. I hear any plotting, and I'll tie a stone to your neck and turf you in. For our mothers, Sanit said. What's that again? I said, yes, Mr. Driver. Lenore squeezed Adi's hand roughly and smiled that awkward smile of hers, her unguarded smile she had worked so hard to own. Adi knew Lenore was trying to soften her mood, knew that Adi was swimming through a swamp lake of emotions. Around Lenore, she often felt like a rabbit in a warren, waiting out the farmer above. But the present circumstances made her that much more anxious, appropriately so. Lenore cupped Adi's hand and kissed the knuckles. Adi was disposed to turn and walk away, but as she stepped forward, Lenore spoke, their fingers grazing. "Let us do what we've come to do," Lenore said. Adi nodded. "Let us do it through and through." In the dining room, Adi approached her father, who sat at the long table with a half-dozen men. After he gave the other men gifts of cigars, she performed a rendition of Mozart's Requiem that the men clapped politely at. She could tell her father was displeased. She'd spent most of the evening down in the kitchen where Mrs. Barrow refused to allow her to assist in preparations instead of up there entertaining, as she was meant to do. "You'll get giblet gravy all over your fancy lace, and then Master Dumarche will hold it against me. No, thank you very much," Mrs. Barrow had said. The men's table was larded with grapes, soft cheeses, and sauces. She thought Mrs. Barrow had prepared something worthy of Dionysus, although the half-eaten dish of rarebit before her father played against that effect. She could see his teeth marks along the bread crust, the saliva that dotted the corners of his lips. Bile rose in the back of her throat. "I'd like you to make sure that you're acquainted with my Antoinette." Is this the one?" said a man to their right. He was clean-shaven with the meticulously tailored clothes of a Virginian. Lenore had come around the table and was sitting now on his lap. The bows at the knees of his stockings grazed Lenore's leg. "Your own," said another man, chewing on hazelnuts, a dish of shells at his wrist. Adi couldn't see John Dumarche's face from behind, but she knew he was smiling now. She's a cherry one, that one," a man said from the far end of the table, slamming his wine goblet down. "A dark cherry if I ever saw one." John Dumarche placed his hand against her lower back. It was not an uncommon gesture from him. "Enchanté," she said with a curtsy and exited. Closing the parlor's door behind her, Adi felt coldness in her head and movement in her stomach. She turned, continued out onto the balcony, and vomited over the railing. A white child, likely a street urchin, was passing by. He stared at her for a moment and ran away, dropping his cap in a puddle. John Dumarche had purchased Adi's mother and herself at an auction near the foot of Conti Street in 1846. Their seller had a servant, a Negro like them, who scrubbed their faces, ears, and teeth with a musty rag. He then shoved them into a large room where they watched a naked man step off a block and join 4 others he was sold with. A man in a white wig pointed at Adi. Had the same Negro servant tear her apart from Sanit, her mother, who was waiting, forced to wait by a column. And still others, recently purchased, were either being held near the walls or led away in chains by the buyers. "As you can see, a likely girl," the man in the wig said. "A babe aged about 5 years, wouldn't you say? Make for a right good scullery maid, don't you think? And down the line, you'll get all the little piglets she produces." Many of the buyers chuckled at this. Adi was older than 5, but small at that time. Her mother would often place her on her shoulders and tell her that one day she'd be tall and free. Though she was afraid, she'd never let her eyes fall from her mother, Sanit's. "Come on, gentlemen. Bids up. Let's move it along. We've got another shipment of these Negroes coming up on barracks at the dock. Cooper, now I wager you need a little one, eh? Come on. She can fetch your pails, pails of water to the boys out on the shore muck." "No thanks," said a short man. "The last squink I bought only lasted a week. It turns out alligators and desert almonds are partial to little chicks." And laughter rose around them. "Quiet down, you rowdies. I spent a barrel of half-dimes on that one." The wig man shook his head. "I shall take her. Representative Dumarche. I hadn't seen you in the moon. You're a good sight." "Not so fast," said Dumarche. He wore a top hat and blue velvet morning coat. "I'll take her at 10% below your asking price. Now, wait a minute, what is this? You trying to run me out? Calm your passions, Burks. You know very well you robbed me on the 5 my man just purchased for my fields. I could easily cancel that sale and go down to Congo Square. Their stock doesn't look like it's been, spent a month at the bottom of some hold of a ship. Burks sputtered. Fine, fine, he said, clearing his throat, because you're an upstanding citizen and a habitual buyer. But don't the rest of you pirates start dreaming of fairy queens and markdowns. And the other men laughed again. And Burks, Dumars said, sir, I'll take that one over there at market price if she is indeed the mother. Burks turned to Adi's mother. You spawned this one? Sunit nodded. On the balcony, Adi clutched the ornate cross at her neck, hard enough to break the skin of her palm. Lenore had given her that pewter cross. She did not see the speck of blood appear. Don't you bother about her, Mrs. Barrow's voice said from the portal in the kitchen. She's just had too much sherry. And they say we Irish toss them back. Before Adi and her mother were sold to the marsh, they had been made to walk barefoot for days. Once her blindfold was removed at the city limits, she saw that her feet were blistered, swollen. It didn't matter that most of their path had been along dirt and mud. Both Adi and Sunit's feet were ripped and blood-crusted. Adi felt a cold lick from the night wind. She pushed the edge of her foot through the gap between the wrought iron bars on the balcony where she stood. Had she and her mother really walked 100 miles barefoot? How was that possible? How allowed? Adi felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Lenore. Adi wasn't sure, but beneath the makeup, she thought she saw the pink of upset on Lenore's taupe skin. I don't, Adi said. What? Lenore asked. I don't want you to do this with me, Adi said. Lenore lowered her face and smiled. What are you thinking? Adi asked. Lenore took Adi's hand. If this be your last night on earth, then it's to be mine as well. Thank you.